Retiring abroad is not an escape from the American financial system. It is a bet that a foreign country's traps are smaller than the ones you are already standing in. Nearly half of all Americans have seriously considered making that bet. Not a short vacation, not a test run, permanently. But the real story is not about the people who leave. It is about what the math actually looks like before they pack the first box. That is where this is going. But first, the problem is not that people are being irrational. The problem is that the numbers at home have become genuinely, structurally brutal. Older Americans are now the fastest growing demographic filing for bankruptcy in this country. Not a marginal uptick. A nearly five-fold surge since 1991. And by the time a senior walks into a courtroom today, they are not starting at zero. The median filer over 65 enters court mathematically underwater by $17,390. The asset column is not depleted. It is gone. What remains is unsecured debt that a fixed Social Security check can never logically pay down. Think about what that finish line looks like. A lifetime of working, paying in, doing exactly what the system asked. And the answer is a negative balance. Here is what the numbers actually look like right now. Walk into any large grocery store or big box retailer in this country. Take a slow look at who is behind the register. Gray-haired cashiers. Men and women in their late 60s stocking shelves. People in their early 70s standing in jobs that were supposed to be 15 years behind them. Almost 1 in 5 Americans over 65 is currently clocking into a job. The Bureau of Labor Statistics confirmed it. Seniors flooding back into retail and warehouse roles because the retirement math collapsed beneath them. Not for fulfillment, not to stay active. For survival. Trading deteriorating joints for hourly wages because there is no other viable calculation. That is not an anomaly. It is the baseline. And underneath all of that financial pressure, the escape fantasy stops feeling like a dream and starts feeling like emergency planning. The videos will show you Thailand first. And honestly, what they show is real. A full knee replacement that costs $50,000 in an American hospital runs roughly $15,000 in Chiang Mai. A heart bypass that sends a family into decades of debt at $150,000 in the United States costs $20,000 in Thailand. At a private, internationally accredited hospital, an American can book a round-trip flight, spend a month recovering in a private suite, have major cardiac surgery performed by internationally certified doctors, and still walk away with over $100,000 more in their account than if they had stayed home. That is not a travel recommendation. Call it what it actually is, financial arbitrage on a life or death scale. Vietnam is not waiting for the trend to find it either. The country is actively engineering a $4 billion medical tourism industry by 2033, building integrated hospital and resort complexes in cities like Da Nang specifically designed to absorb aging Americans who can no longer afford to get sick at home. A country once targeted by American military spending is now spending billions to keep aging Americans alive. You can sit with that irony however long you need. And then there is Japan. Nobody leads with Japan because it does not fit the cheap retirement template. But what it reveals about America is worth the detour. In Tokyo, a train arriving 90 seconds behind schedule becomes a national news event. Formal written apologies are issued. Miami's Metrorail runs 20 to 30 minutes late during off-peak hours, and nobody treats it as anything other than a normal Tuesday. Tokyo's violent homicide rate sits at roughly 0.2 per 100,000 people. The United States average hovers around 5. These are not cultural differences. They are structural measurements of the daily cost of living inside a system that stopped maintaining itself decades ago. What the videos do not show you. Mexico remains the most accessible option for most people running the numbers. The math looks right at first glance. But there is a line item the travel content never includes. Rents in Puerto Vallarta climbed roughly 8% year-over-year heading into 2026. Merida is up 6%, far outpacing the country's general inflation. The same American dollars buying someone a cheap ocean view are actively pricing local families out of the neighborhoods their grandparents built. The communities are not quiet about this. The sentiment is not friction. It is displacement. Americans arrived fleeing the gentrification of Austin and Miami. They became the gentrification in someone else's hometown. Nobody warns them about what comes after that realization. And it has nothing to do with rent. Portugal was supposed to be the answer for the more careful calculation. The non-habitual resident tax regime offered a flat 10% rate on foreign pension income. Thousands of Americans structured their entire retirement around that number. That regime is dead for new arrivals. What replaced it is a standard progressive tax system with rates reaching 48%. A $150,000 pension that once meant a $15,000 annual Portuguese tax bill now means a bill of $52,000 to $55,000. The YouTube influencers are still posting about Lisbon's pastel streets. They have not updated the math. The problem is the math follows you regardless of where you land. The United States taxes its citizens based on citizenship, not residency. The IRS requires a return filed every year, no matter where you sleep. An expat pays a specialized cross-border accountant between $600 and $3,000 annually just to handle that filing. That money comes directly out of the savings the move was supposed to generate. Here is what that accountant will not mention until it is already too late. Open a local checking account in your new country to pay for groceries. Because that is not optional. That is basic survival. Forget to file a form called an FBAR, and the United States government is legally authorized to fine you $16,536 per violation, even if the mistake was entirely innocent. Even if the account holds barely $10,000, the fine is larger than the account balance. Not a theoretical danger. A live, invisible mechanism waiting for the first oversight. Think about being 74 years old in a foreign hospital in the middle of the night, trying to explain your medication history through a translation app that keeps misreading what you type. Remove your Medicare card from the picture. Abroad, it is worthless. If the situation turns critical and you need a dedicated medical evacuation flight back to the United States, that flight costs between $120,000 and $180,000. In cash, no policy covers it. That is not a medical complication. Call it what it is, a financial death sentence issued from a foreign tarmac. Why most people stay anyway? Here is the part the videos never get to. Not the tax forms, not the penalties. Something older and harder to put a number on. A major behavioral health study found that Americans living abroad carry a 50% higher risk of clinical anxiety and depression, 2.5 times more likely to develop severe depression than Americans who never left. The expats describe it as committing treason against everything they have ever known. You gain the affordable surgery, the functioning trains, the cheap apartment with the ocean view. And then one evening you are scrolling through photos of a grandchild's birthday you could not make it back for. And you realize the invisible infrastructure you left behind. The doctor who knew your full history, the neighbor with your spare key, the roads you drove without thinking, the entire accumulated weight of a life built somewhere. That was never just convenience. It was the architecture of who you were. Nobody says that out loud, but every single person who left already knows it. Portugal sells ease. It cannot sell the person you spent 40 years building at home. Millions dream of leaving. Fewer than 5,000 people actually renounced their citizenship in 2024. Because the moment you try to permanently cut the cord, the government triggers an exit tax on a theoretical sale of every asset you own. You pay for money you have not even made yet. For the privilege of handing back a passport. The escape hatch is not locked. It is just more expensive than it looks in the video. And the things you decide not to look at closely have a way of becoming the only things you can see. Has the math of retirement in America changed how you think about where you might end up? Drop your honest answer below.